If I had a nickel for every time
There was a Ferrari theme park.
I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Yeah, so Ferrari theme parks, a bit of an unusual departure from everything needing to be based on a movie. Well, there was that Hard Rock Park in Myrtle Beach in 2008, so I suppose that's different too. Actually, are Ferrari theme parks even theme parks, or are they just branded amusement parks? I mean, they do have many generic rides with a race theme and the Ferrari brand slapped onto them, so yeah, maybe there is a distinction to make here. Well anyways, what got me into this topic was my recent visit to Legoland Florida, which, if you haven't checked that video out, provides my very mixed thoughts on the experience of that park. However, something that I found interesting was Ferrari Build and Race, which just opened this past March. It was obviously themed, or I suppose branded, to Ferrari. Legoland Florida has many experiences where you're given a selection of bricks and tasked with building something, and this particular attraction is focused on Ferrari and racing, obviously. When you walk in, you're greeted with historical photos and a timeline of the evolution of Ferrari, but most people will be drawn to the Ferrari 296 GTS, made almost completely out of Lego and designed to be a photo op. Moving on into the main room of the attraction, you can stop at any of the building stations and assemble your own Ferrari race car, then using the multiple tracks to test its performance. Different tracks have different test functions, and there's even an area for Duplo car assembly if kids are too young even for Lego. In the final room, there is also a virtual racing game, as well as shelving to display cars that people have made throughout the day, which also happens to showcase real Ferrari Lego sets that have been produced both in the present and the past. So this is a fun little diversion of an attraction, and I'm certain it's popular with Ferrari and F1 fans, but in the back of my mind I kept thinking, hey, is there not a Ferrari theme park in Spain as part of Port Aventura? Well, after looking into it, and to my surprise, it's actually the second Ferrari branded park, with the first having opened in Abu Dhabi. I suppose I had heard of this park, but kind of assumed that they were both just the same thing, because I barely knew anything about them, but as someone who is interested in theme parks, I figured that I should make an effort to actually learn about them. If you're Disney or Universal, I can certainly understand how attractions are designed around intellectual property from movies, but how does not one, but 2 entertainment offerings based on the Ferrari brand even exist as full parks? Well, let's go find out. Hey, just a quick favor, but videos like these take a lot of time and effort to research, so if you'd like to support the channel, one easy way to do that is to leave a like. Developed by Aldar Properties and opening in 2010, Ferrari World is located on Yas Island in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, and is the first indoor theme park in a growing resort complex. It was followed by the outdoor Yas Water World Abu Dhabi, a water park in 2013, but was joined by actual indoor theme parks with 2018's Warner Bros. World, and most recently SeaWorld Abu Dhabi in 2022. Ferrari World is notably interesting though, because you have to wonder, why develop a luxury Italian car and racing brand into a theme park? Well, if you know anything about Dubai or the UAE, then it's easy to recognize its obsession with wealth and luxury, fueled by its massive oil reserves. However, the world is clearly moving away from this, and Middle Eastern countries have recognized the need for change, with the UAE investing massively into positioning itself as a major tourist destination full of theme parks and resorts. I can't speak as to how successful this has been, although by most anecdotal accounts, the theme parks in this country often seem rather empty, propped up by oil money in the hopes that they'll one day be desirable. When I look at a place like Motion Gate in Dubai, it's interesting not because it's a great theme park, but because it feels like a bad emulation of one, designed by people who don't really understand attraction design, which is far more complex than just adding a popular movie to a ride system. It's not bad, it is a place I would be curious to visit, but what makes it interesting is that it misses the point. So how does Ferrari World, the first theme park in this new era of the country, manage to hold up against Dubai parks and resorts? Well, I think its greatest strength is its focus on thrills, and if you're going specifically to seek that out, it does seem worth traveling out of your way for. Ferrari World sits in a massive and conspicuously red structure as an extension of Yas Mall, which actually opened in 2014. Once inside the park, you'll notice a race theme and Ferrari branding everywhere, and of course a Ferrari theme park is going to feature actual cars, as you can see scattered around on display. There's not much in the way of theming, as the general aesthetic is just indoor mall, but there is one corridor themed to Italy with shops and restaurants, which I suppose makes sense as Ferrari is viewed as an important Italian cultural symbol. The center of the park has a nice selection of racing-themed rides for kids and families, which includes a spinning flat ride called Tire Twist, Turbo Tower, which is a small drop tower as you would expect, and Flying Wings, which is a hang glider-themed flat ride that doesn't have anything to do with Ferrari or racing, at least as far as I can determine. There are many other types of rides and experiences found throughout the park, such as Bella Italia, a self-driving car ride through miniatures of Italian cities, landmarks, and landscapes, or the various museums or upcharge experiences, such as go-karts or racing simulators. Before I get to the coasters, which are definitely the main draw of the park, I do want to mention that it does have a small selection of dark rides. First, let's start with the bad one, which is called Speed of Magic. Riders enter a pre-show room where they witness a young boy playing a video game and is thwarted by an in-game character known as Nello. After a brief race for a key and losing, the boy is visited by his father, who offers to help and cheer him up by giving him the keys to his Ferrari, which seems both irrelevant and irresponsible. The father leaves, and as the kid struggles to find his shoes, Nello breaks out of the game and steals the keys, sucking the boy into the game to challenge him to a race. From here, riders grab 3D glasses and board the simulator vehicles, which are conceptually similar to Universal Spider-Man or Transformers attractions. Taking on the role of the boy, you pass by screens and race Nello through various environments as he teases you and tries to sabotage your vehicle. The ride is mostly screens, but there are some occasional and poorly constructed blacklight physical sets that completely disrupt the pacing, because, you know, it's a fast-paced race. Towards the end, and after having moved through various biomes, Nello hops into your dad's Ferrari and races you through a city, where after a bit of flying around, you win by crashing through a checkered flag, and the ride abruptly returns you back to the station. Speed of Magic is, well, not great, because it feels cheap and has awful pacing, as in it's overly long and becomes tedious, especially among its dated looking 3D. Luckily though, Ferrari World does look to include better dark rides, so let's explore those next. While not really a dark ride, I do want to mention that the park does offer a flying theater experience known as Viaggio in Italia, which does appear to be difficult to view online as the park prohibits filming on it. There is one old video that I believe is of the ride that you're seeing on screen now, which depicts exactly what you would expect, a scenic flight of Italy. Of course, it wouldn't make sense in Ferrari World without an actual Ferrari driving through the scenes, so I'm assuming that this is the actual ride film. By accounts I've read, the ride is just kind of okay for a flying theater experience, but it doesn't look outright annoying and tedious like Speed of Magic is. Moving on, I want to next briefly highlight Made in Maranello, a slow-moving dark ride that takes you through the history and development of Ferrari. It reminds me a bit of Hershey's Chocolate Tour, or even Magic Kingdom's If You Had Wings, because of how heavy it is on just lighting and screens, but despite what some might consider dry education, I can at least appreciate it in what it's trying to teach. This might not be anyone's favorite attraction, but people often seem to forget the importance of a slow-moving ride through the dark that's just inherently relaxing. Finishing up the dark rides is Benno's Great Race, which on first glance appears to be another interactive screen-based shooting attraction, which are never really good outside of Toy Story Mania, but I'm happy to say that this is actually quite unique. Following Benno, a Ferrari racing mouse, riders are tasked with removing obstacles from the racetrack that were placed there specifically to sabotage Benno. Alternating between physical scenes and screens, riders are equipped with wrenches that allow them to interact with the narrative, but instead of just shooting targets, the screens present varied tasks that aid the story. For example, in one scene before the race, you'll pick out parts and assemble Benno's car, and later you'll clear out obstacles such as spiderwebs in a spooky thicket by cutting key points on the web. The interaction between physical sets and screens works well, as here you can see Benno being held up by a tomato, and as the scene transitions into a screen, you'll then be clearing the tomatoes by squashing them. Ultimately, the minigames are designed so that they can't be lost and the narrative just continues, but there's a lot of variety in the tasks, and the ride is cleverly different from anything similar I've seen, which always seems to be focused on hitting targets and racking up points, which has quickly gotten stale. Naturally, Benno wins the race as you would expect, but while predictable, the uniqueness of the ride really stands out. Ferrari World, as we've just covered, seems to have a decent number of family attractions and is well balanced in that regard, but if there's one big appeal, it's definitely the coasters. If we should start anywhere, it's with Formula Rossa, which opens with the park and is the fastest roller coaster in the world, launching you at 149 miles per hour. Manufactured by Intamin, the intent behind this coaster was to make you feel the speed and acceleration that an F1 driver would feel, and beyond the launch, the coaster is essentially just wide banked turns and camelbacks. It looks thrilling as it launches you out of the building, and for having such a notable world record, I'm surprised that I was only vaguely aware of its existence and assumed that it was in Spain. So if there's one signature attraction of Ferrari World, it's definitely Formula Rossa. Still, the park contains other notable coasters, so let's pivot to another opening day attraction, Fiorano GT Challenge. Manufactured by Mauer, this launched racing coaster pits you against another driving team as you fly out of the building and launch 4 separate times. I also like how clever the abstract theming is, using cars for the trains and utilizing a lot of barely banked turns to simulate the feeling of racing down a winding track. The next coaster added to the park was Flying Aces in 2016, manufactured by Intamin. The coaster is themed to flying in a biplane and is notable for its non-inverting loop, but I was a bit unsure of why the theme was chosen. While Ferrari was not under the ownership of Fiat when the coaster premiered, Fiat does have a history of developing planes, so I'm assuming that's the inspiration behind it. Regardless, it looks like a pretty solid coaster and another standout reason to visit the park. The following year, another Intamin coaster debuted known as Turbo Track, which essentially launches you out of the building and into a twisted spike. You have the option of either loading forwards or backwards for the experience of your choice, and while the synchronized lighting is cool, I can't say that I find this particularly notable. Still, it looks like a solid experience for a coaster that adds capacity, so that's always a plus. In a similar manner, the park added a Zamperla family coaster in 2020 named Formula Rossa Jr., filling in the need for additional capacity for a family demographic. Finally, after much trouble and technical issues, 2023 was the premiere of Mission Ferrari, manufactured by Dynamic Attractions, and is the only running model of what is known as the SFX coaster. The premise behind the coaster model is that it's a storytelling device that uses many unique mechanics on its track. In this case, Mission Ferrari is a spy thriller, using sets, physical figures, and screens to create the ride experience. However, the coaster also does some rather unique things, such as reversing on the track, locking onto a moving piece of straight track and falling backwards onto another course, which then proceeds into a backwards vertical loop. And while the mechanism seems difficult to conceptualize unless you ride it, the ride does claim to have a sideways drop. Unfortunately, Mission Ferrari seems incredibly unreliable because of these elements, and has reportedly closed for extended periods of time since opening, but the idea of this experience is very unique to this park. The financial status of Dynamic Attractions is dire, so this may be the only SFX coaster that ever opens, as other standing but not operating rides they've built in other parks have yet to see any operation. Ferrari World is actually a pretty interesting park, one that I think holds up quite a bit better than I expected. The coasters look very well thought out and thrilling, and the variety of family attractions seems to be a really good balance, making this park a pretty desirable destination. With that said, let's turn towards Ferrari Land in Spain, because, well, that park is very much the opposite. To understand why Ferrari Land exists, you need to briefly discuss the history of Port Aventura. The development of the park was spearheaded by Anheuser-Busch, and with a few other investors involved, opened in 1995 in Barcelona. The park is themed to an eclectic selection of different regions of the world, and like the Busch Gardens parks, struck an interesting balance between theming and thrill rides. However, after a series of ownership changes, including a brief period of operation by Universal, who built a water park and 2 hotels, the resort was ultimately passed around by investment firms, and well, you know the kind of damage that they do. In the past, people in my comments have highlighted issues with how the park is managed and how little care is put into it, so it's not surprising that as part of expanding the resort, Ferrari Land opened as a second gate in 2017. This park relies more on the Ferrari name than quality to bring people in, and while there is one signature attraction that we'll get into in just a bit, there's not really much here. In fact, despite being outdoors, Ferrari Land is only 17 acres in size, when the indoor Ferrari World is 21 acres and features many more attractions. So walking into the park, you'll get a sense that conceptually, it's very similar aesthetically to Abu Dhabi, mixing the look of a sleek car dealership with Italian buildings. It's nothing remarkable, and I think works for what it is, but if you want to get into the attractions, well, it's mostly just kids rides that are vaguely themed to racing or Ferrari. This worked in Ferrari World because it balanced these out with thrills and dark rides, but the attractions for really young kids is the majority of what you'll find here. Also, I need to point out a tracked ride called Maranello Grand Race, which after watching a few vlogs, I've observed that the cars just barely work and will stop randomly despite your input. However, the park does offer a few attractions outside of these, so let's first discuss the conspicuous red building known as the Ferrari Experience. Inside, there are 3 attractions, one of which showcases Ferrari cars, but the other 2 are simulators. To board, you move into one of 2 lines that move through an energetic lobby, using screens, projections, and lighting to create a lot of kinetic energy. Depending on which attraction you choose, you go through a series of pre-shows, but on the left is a flying theater known as Flying Dreams. Conceptually, this is similar to Ferrari World, where you'll follow a Ferrari while flying, but instead of limiting itself to Italy, this one travels the world. Reviews seem lukewarm on this experience as well. If you take the line to the right, you'll also go through a series of pre-shows and into a simulator known as Racing Legends. This seems similar to the original Back to the Future theater, where you sit on a motion base under a big domed screen, although reportedly these vehicles barely move at all. The actual film depicts a simulated F1 race, which has been noted as tediously long and unexciting, especially since there's barely any movement. To conclude the tour of this remarkably small park, I'll first mention a pair of S&S Space Yacht Towers, known simply as Thrill Towers. The one on the right brings you to the top and drops you, while the tower on the left does a more traditional launch sequence. They don't seem particularly exciting, but a launch or drop tower always adds a lot to the skyline of a park, so at least they have that going for them. However, we've now reached the main draw of Ferrari Land, which is the remarkable Red Force. Like its predecessors Top Thrill Dragster at Cedar Point and Kingda Ka at Six Flags Great Adventure, this is another intense intimate launch coaster that brings you through a short loop up a top hat and back down into the station. Unlike the others though, Red Force is shorter, achieving a top height of 365 feet as opposed to Dragster's 420 or Ka's 456. Still, Red Force is the tallest and fastest coaster in Europe, launching riders at 112 miles per hour using LSMs, which, while not as forceful as the hydraulic launches of Dragster or Kingda Ka, is still notably powerful and is the easiest way for Europeans to get a similar experience. Also worth noting is that LSMs are a lot more reliable than hydraulic launches, so the ride experiences much less downtime. Like Dragster, there is also a grandstand viewing area where you can watch the coaster launch, and while the ride may be the only reason to visit the park, I don't think you can deny how intimidating and kinetically impressive it is. Is this ride, and by extension this park, a positive reflection of the Ferrari brand though? I'd say probably not. So let's discuss that. Ferrari Land is really not much of anything without Red Force, and so the question becomes, how do people justify paying for admission? Well, I can't say that if I went to the park, I would really do anything other than this. I would probably wait for the simulator attractions or the car ride just to experience them, but Red Force otherwise seems like the only thing to do unless you're a really young child. However, I should also discuss the pricing, which varies depending on the day you visit, but only comes out to around $22 to $25 US. I think about when I went to Vegas and spent $15 just to ride the Big Apple coaster for the novelty. So do I think that a maximum of $25 for Red Force is unreasonable? I suppose you can justify that if you also try the other experiences, even if their quality is questionable, and at the very least, you can ride the coaster repeatedly until the park closes. If you watched my Legoland Florida video and remember how I stated that the adjacent Peppa Pig theme park is an astounding $67 for adult admission, then Ferrari Land looks like an absolute steal in comparison. The question arises though, why is Ferrari Land a second gate and not just an actual land of Port Aventura? Well, I don't have an official answer, but I'm assuming that it's just a quick and cheap cash grab by the resort, knowing that the Ferrari branding will bring people in. It's not that the park is totally devoid of effort, as Red Force looks like a quality ride, but the rest of the park appears to have just been quickly thrown together. As someone who doesn't care much about cars, it's my understanding that Ferrari is very protective of their brand, and while I can understand why they would license it out to Ferrari World, especially because the UAE is defined by its embrace of luxury brands, why allow Port Aventura to tarnish that image? Maybe I'm thinking too much into it, and maybe that's exactly what Ferrari wanted, as in their logo on a conspicuous and notable roller coaster. Even so, in the world of movie-themed rides, it's notable that Ferrari is branded on two separate parks, and even has its own Legoland attraction. With Red Force and the coasters of Ferrari World, the theme of racing does lend itself to that type of high-intensity experience, and I would even say that Ferrari World itself is a much better ambassador of the brand. That's actually what surprised me the most, because I didn't expect much considering what I've learned about other parks in Dubai, but the Yas Island parks seem to have been developed with a bit more care and effort, and so I can see how they would all draw in more people. Do I want to visit these parks? Sure, I'm interested in visiting any theme park, and I'm glad to have used this video as an excuse to research them, because Ferrari World in particular has a lot of standouts to me, whether it be the coasters or even some of the dark rides. While I've heard so many mixed things about the Port Aventura resort, at the very least Ferrari Land seems reasonably priced for the experience, even if you're only really going to primarily ride Red Force. The only Ferrari experience that doesn't seem worth the value is, well, Legoland Florida, because the attraction is fun for what it is, but you probably know my thoughts on the outrageous pricing of the park for what it has to offer. So, hopefully you enjoyed this brief look into the world of Ferrari theme parks, which at the very least appeared to be a thematically interesting idea to me. I was surprised to learn about how strong the experience is for Ferrari World, and did not expect Ferrari Land to be so sparse on attractions, but they're still quite thematically notable, and I hope you learned something as well if you didn't know much about these parks before. As always, you can help this video out by leaving a like if you haven't yet done so, and if you want to stay notified for more theme park videos like this, you can also hit the subscribe button with bell notification so as to stay updated on new videos as they release.